This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody, my name is John Bleasdale and welcome to Writers on Film. I've done that the wrong way around. Hello everybody, welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale and today I'm really looking forward to talking to a friend of mine, Justin John Doherty, who is the author of Don't Look Now and Then, one of my favourite films of all time, definitely in my top 10. Thank you for joining me, Justin.
Well, lovely to be here.
So this book, I have to immediately declare an interest because I was in a very small way, a contributor, but it's an absolutely gorgeous book. I hesitate to say coffee table book because that's, in some ways, sometimes people use that a little bit derisively, but this is just...
but I end up calling it that most of the time because it's the only sort of way, I sort of say art book sometimes, you know, and people like, I don't know, sort of see a glazed look. So I do sort of gesture size and call it a coffee table book. That's where I hope it will end up on most people's houses, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it ends up on your coffee table, it's a handsome edition, full of wonderful pictures, many of which have never been published before, which you've sort of gone and discovered. Let's start at the beginning. When did you first have the idea of creating this book, and why this particular film?
Well, I guess there's sort of like two stages to this. There's all the way back, which is probably about there's all the way back to when I saw it, which is why I did the book. This film sort of changed me as a filmmaker. You know, I saw it as when I was sort of middle teens, maybe about 14, and I wasn't allowed to watch whatever I wanted when I was a kid. You know, I loved movies and stuff, but yeah, my parents, they kind of adhered to the BBFC guidelines of, you know, what was suitable, and I really had to campaign if I wanted to watch anything that was an 18 certificate or whatever. So, but it was I appreciate that as it later in life, but. This film sort of got through the net as something they thought was really interesting to watch because I was really starting to wonder about what filmmaking was, and they remembered it as a really important film, so and so they showed me that, and I did watch that with my parents, sex scene and all, and it really floored me, you know, and even all the layers of sort of romanticism I put on that later on in life, it still was that sort of shock ending moment when I suddenly realised, oh, this is what you could do. This is what you could do with editing. And this is what you could do with cinematography. And you can show glass breaking at the beginning and you can show glass breaking at the end. And you can put that together and you can tie these little images up. And it's sort of like a real sort of penny drop moment, you know. And it sort of stayed with me. And none of my friends had seen it. And it was sort of slowly, it was always the film I sort of said, oh, it's my favourite film when people asked, because I like to be different. And but then as it sort of, and there wasn't much about it at the time, you know, you couldn't really get it. Eventually, it came back out on VHS, and I started to bore my friends with it and whatever. But then it was there in my life as my favourite film. As you know, as filmmakers and film people, we always get asked, "What's your favourite film?" And that was always the one. And then sort of fast forward, sort of later on in life, and you know, it's starting to, it started to be more about that film, and it's making its way into the top 10 lists of Sight and Sound and the BFI, and it's starting to get recognised a bit more, and this is great because I'm seeing more about it. And I then fast forward then to about 2007-8, and not really with any plan. I was in Venice for the first time with a girlfriend, and I sort of started to find locations, just sort of serendipitously, really, sort of recognizing them because they were etched in my memory. Just alleyways is weird, you know, but the iPhone had just come out as well, so I had the film on my iPhone, and so I was able to match it up and think, oh yeah, this is the one. And then we thought, oh well, if that was filmed there, then they can't have gone that far to film this next bit. And before we knew it, we'd sort of spent our days just finding this out. And I decided, I was running a film festival at the time, and I decided to do a little exhibition of these pictures, just sort of now and then, you know, sort of the things that had changed and the things that hadn't changed, and mostly, especially in Venice, nothing's changed, just the waterline maybe. Uh, some of these some of these pictures, or posters that were sort of pasted to the backs of walls, and I'd been trying to get Nick Roeg to come to our festival film stock since the beginning. And I sort of always written to him, and he'd sort of very politely declined all these years. But that year, 2008, Puffball was coming out, his final film, and we met one of the producers of that, Dan Weldon, Faye Weldon's son, and he said, "Oh, I can probably get Nick along to that." And so we did a Puffball screening, but alongside that, because Nick wasn't always didn't always love at that stage looking back, because everyone wanted to talk about the same sort of three or four films. I sort of did this thing on the side about Don't Look Now, and it really tickled him. He loved it. He loved the obsession of it. He loved the just looking at the pictures and really responded to it. And we had a lovely time in Luton, just sort of hanging out with Nick Roeg. And it was him who said, "Oh, there's a book here. There's a book in this." Whether that book's an obsession or whether that book's about the film, it was sort of we sort of discussed what that could be. And then as life goes, you move on. We finished our festival sort of the following year to sort of concentrate on making films. This is myself and Neil Fox, who I know you know,
Yeah.
from Cinematologist podcast, and we decided to sort of concentrate on filmmaking, and I put that aside, but it was always there, the idea to make a book, but I never really could figure out what the shape of it was, and I was pretty too young, and sort of it would have maybe been a bit two-dimensional had I sort of pursued it then. And then all this way later, sort of, films, many films later, and I'd opened a jazz club and sort of was passing on the jazz club, this thing I'd built. I was sort of finding myself a bit disconnected from movies and making films. And I was about to leave my jazz club behind, which had really taken over my life for about 8 years. And I thought, you know what? This is a project I could do on my own. I should pick up this idea again about a book, because I've been seeing these lovely books, about films. The cine art gallery ones about Once Upon a Time in the West, and I kept on seeing these lovely books, thinking, sorry, a Real Art Press, I should say. Sorry, got the name wrong there. They had a nice one about Rosemary's Baby, and I thought, there should be one about Don't Look Now. Even if it's just for me and the other few people I know who love it. And so it was a kind of thing to grapple onto, really, to sort of connect with film again. And I knew if I wasn't going to make another film again, I'd be quite happy celebrating old films in a way. That's sort of why I loved doing film festivals. That's why I loved, I always loved that sort of behind the scenes stuff. Not the sort of making ofs in a sense, but just seeing corners of streets and alleyways and thinking, oh, they made that there. And Neil Fox always says and he put it very well, because he's known me forever. So I said, it's the proximity that I love. It's like being close to something where something happened. That means something, and he says, you've always loved that, and he's true. He's right. When I was a kid, we'd go on holiday and be like, did they make a James Bond film here? Like, that was my baseline for where I wanted to go on holiday.
Just booking.com, sort of one of the filters is this a James Bond location? I'll just filter out the ones that aren't.
I mean, they probably have that now, but my parents were very patient with that. But I thought, well, I'd like to do that. So I sort of, a very long answer to your question. I sort of then started to sort of see, well, what could this book possibly have in it? Is there archive? What is there? And I knew I didn't want it to be a traditional making of book. I really like those books, and I've got lots of those. But I just sort of knew in my gut that this wasn't a film that was going to have an interesting daily schedule for which to sort of make a story of. On day 23 we went down to the Grand Canal and did it. It's just not. That's also not interesting to me anymore. What was interesting was for me to just, lay out the archive, and have the sort of experience, so everyone could experience the book in the same way that I did finding the material. Because I got such a buzz out of finding material, whether it was someone giving me one picture or whether it was finding, a couple of thousand pictures, which happened later down the line. I wanted, you to have that experience, like I'd given you a box file. You just get to go through it and sort of put it together yourself, because with films like this so long ago, and in the book I really embrace this, there's so much contradiction. And I think Nick would have loved that, because memory, he loved time and memory and how that kind of gets squeezed and pulled. And so the idea that on one page you've got someone remembering something very specifically about Donald, And on the opposite page, you've got someone remembering the opposite about
Mm.
Donald, and both are true in their ways, because they're both living memories. But I think that's what I wanted to present, not like a definitive fact-finding thing about getting to the bottom of it, because I don't care personally. I don't, and I generally don't think that's what people want out of this. They want to see behind the scenes of these films that they've never seen before, and mostly this era of films, that behind the scenes stuff hasn't been available until the advent of the internet and the pictures that people put online and from the archives. But these press photos, they print 20 press photos about a film. That's pretty much what lived out there in the world, and everything
Yeah.
else went into a box. And if you're lucky, that box was kept safely, but sometimes they weren't.
It reminds me, talking of boxes, what you were saying there about your proximity, Neil Fox's phrase, reminds me of John Ronson's documentary about Stanley Kubrick and his Kubrick's boxes, and that idea of delving in and almost randomly in one box you have like hundreds of pictures of bedside lamps, and then another hundreds of pictures of hospital corridors, because he needed them for Eyes Wide Shut, and there's even, I think at one point he gets out facts, which is about instructions on how to make his boxes, because he wants his boxes to be a certain measurement and to have a lid which would just sort of whisper on and off.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Utterly brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I think that point that you make as well, that you didn't want something straightforwardly back to behind the scenes. Sorry, I was thinking Back to the Future for some reason, but behind the scenes, it goes with the sort of ineffability of the past in the film itself. Everybody's looking at things differently in the film, so it's only right that everybody should be looking at things differently as they try to reconstruct the making of the film.
Yeah, it's sort of the ultimate, the ultimate theme which Nick came away with from the film is, nothing is as it seems, which sort of ends up as a throwaway line in the script early on. He told Donald that, Donald was going to say the essence of the film, and it really threw him, and he did loads of takes of sort of putting loads of emphasis on nothing is as it seems. Nothing's as it's until he just said, "Oh, forget it, Donald, just throw it away," and he does, and it works. But yeah, everything obviously everything you see in that film is a sort of you're being asked to personally put the puzzle together a lot of the time. And have we seen that beam fall from the church? Did we just see that? Because it tells us just before it's actually happened, and that they sort of stretch time there, but they let us into these secrets that if you're paying attention you see, and if you don't, just passes you by. So you can have two very different experiences watching that film. I think if you're double screening, you'll have a different experience there than if you're fully watching it. And again, it's why this film. You ask why this film. It's the film that every time I've come back to it in life, whether it's to sort of show a girlfriend or show a friend or just revisit it because I wanted to watch it again, I found something new in it. I genuinely have seen something different or experienced it in a different way. Bits of the film that I used to find a bit weren't that interesting to me when I was younger, and now really interesting to me. It's a totally different film now. I'm a father. When I rewatched it at the start of making this book, my little girl was the same age as the little girl in the movie, and I didn't expect it to have that effect on me. I've seen that opening scene 100 times, but I didn't expect, while watching it with friends, to suddenly have that opening scene hit me in a completely different emotional way. And I used to, as a teenager, you love shock endings and things. It's what it's why we love The Usual Suspects. All those sorts of things. We love that sort of twisty ending, and that was always really the thing I was waiting to see. But there's so much more I wait to see in it now. It sort of moved with me through life. Now I'm married. I look at it as like an amazing film about marriage.
Yeah,
and watching these two really interesting people who are so clearly married, which is incredible to their performances because they didn't really know each other. They really just met on that. They didn't, and so they amazing. It's so subtle. A lot of the things they do, the little bickering, the little not hearing each other quite from the bathroom and the hotel room, just these little moments, and you recognise that now as an older person, as sort of core to sort of relationships and knowing everyone's sort of second move. And I love that about it. So it's this movable feast, which again I think speaks in volumes to sort of why the film lasts so long, because you can come back to it and experience something. And it's also just a really good yarn. At the
Mm.
end of the day, Nick wanted to tell a good yarn, and if you just want to watch it from that point of view, yeah, it's just a yarn about someone who doesn't listen to some good advice and ends up, being killed because of it. And as in the short story, the last line of Du Maurier's short story is, "What a bloody silly way to die." It's as
Mm.
simple as that. He should have listened. He didn't listen, and but then if you peel off under that, you get all these other layers. If you want to, delve into that, and they're there for forevermore.
Yeah, I must admit, when I first saw it, I wasn't that into it. I thought, oh, it's okay, but I wasn't into Nick Roeg generally, and the reason was I found him he reminded me of a sort of 70s ugliness, that there was this thing in the 70s of everything got a bit grottier. The 60s was flower power and love and everything, and it was like the 70s was the ashtray after the party and everything. Somebody's turned the lights on, and then I rewatched, and I was very impressed by the ending. I thought the ending was very good, and was probably the thing I liked the most about it on my first viewing, and that drew me back to it. I've got to watch that again because I've got to see if I really understood it. And when I did rewatch it subsequently, and then years and years and years have gone by, and I've rewatched it. Must be one of my most rewatched films because I've written about this film a whole bunch as well. It's gone from being, as I say, a film that initially I found slightly repugnant and I didn't really go with. When she falls and drags the table with her right at the very beginning, and you see all that food hitting the floor in slow motion, they're sort of like, oh, everything. And then I sort of realized, well, that's the point. That's the essence. Everything is falling to pieces. Everything is entropic. It's all this calamity, this mud. The first line Donald Sutherland says when he's in Venice is in Italian. He says, "È tutto marcio." It's all rotten. Where the first thing you see of Venice is the rotten foundations of a building. It's the anti-romantic view of Venice. It's utterly, in the background, in many shots, you can see piled up rubbish, and you can see a Venice in peril poster from the floods, so it's, in many ways, Venice is in more danger then than it is now. But as it's increased, and as you say, I totally agree with you about this idea that it changes with you and as you grow up. Nowadays, I watch it, and the ending, as good as it is, and if you're watching it for the first time, it will definitely give you the willies. The beginning for me is the most horrific thing that will happen in the film, and it's the most shocking thing that happens in the entire film. And it's almost like, that famous thing about Psycho, it's like it's such a surprise to kill someone so early on, a main character. For me, it's almost as if that prologue, the rest of the film is just an aftermath to that prologue, and it's almost as if, who was I talking to? I was talking to somebody recently that said, that the ending of the film is almost like a happy ending because he's going back to his daughter, and that's why all the bells are ringing.
That's why sort of Laura has she has a particular look on her face. It's almost a smile, It's almost
that they'll be together, and that'll be because we presented the book. It wasn't actually planned as a presentation, but we kind of were having there's an event in Venice called Venice Noir, which is taking place in Noirvember, as fittingly. And Ian Rankin, the Scottish novelist, was there. Philip Gwyn Jones, the Welsh novelist of loads of Venetian crime novels, with his Nathan Sutherland series, was there, and we talked about the book, and we talked about the film. And it was a really interesting discussion because everybody, everybody also had a different sort of entry point in. And so you had that in the book as well. You talked to a lot of different people in terms of, you have a lot of different contributors to the book.
Well, yeah, because I was sort of also, because certainly at the beginning there was sort of it was a fail-safe. I was like, well, I don't know how much archive I'm going to find, so let me think about this. And I don't want, I'm obviously a different guest than you usually have because people have done the actual writing about the film or about their material. Obviously, I haven't written a lot in this. It's more been a kind of editing and direction role I've taken, apart from the lengthy introduction I wrote. I knew I didn't want it to be just why does Justin like Don't Look Now? That's not interesting to anyone except me. And as the film had become more spoken about, from its sort of wilderness years when I first saw it, over to when it was now on these top 10 lists, I would start to see people speak about how much they love the film. Brett Goldstein, the actor, comedian, writer, who you may know from Ted Lasso and Shrinking, he'd performed comedy at my jazz club. We used to have, and he'd seen my film posters, and he sort of said, "Oh, that's one of my favourite films." And so I clocked that, and just other people along the way. I knew Mark Jenkin, who I'd known through my film festival for about 20 years. I always knew Mark liked Don't Look Now and Nick Roeg, and so I thought I'd like there to be multiple voices in this, because not everyone is. There's still quite a lot of people alive who were there when it was made, and almost everyone has contributed to the book in one way or another. But I also wanted it to kind of be complemented by what does it mean then? Again, which is what the title's about, both photographically, Don't Look Now and Then, but also the people who made it, and also the people like me and you who kind of wish we were there, and it means something too, whether it's inspired us to make something. And so having different conversations in the book between people. So you're the first one I did with Pino Donaggio in Venice, and that's sort of how we met and came together. Again, just sort of serendipity, really. That worked, and then
I have to explain that one, because that was a very interesting and quite surreal experience for me, because I teach in Venice, as you know, and so in the morning at 8:45 to 10:15 I had a lesson. Then I went to meet you about 11 or whatever time it was. Maybe it was a little bit later. I went to meet you for the first time ever. We met up. We rushed over to Cannaregio, which is near the ghetto, the original ghetto. The first ever in the world. It comes from a Venetian word. And we met Pino Donaggio, the writer of the music. It was his first score for a film. He's this pop singer, massive career as a pop singer in Italy. He composed You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, which was a huge hit for Dusty Springfield, and Elvis covered. And he was quite, you see, he kind of repeated that fact quite a few times. This is where
80 million records.
Yeah, 80 million, exactly. Yeah. He had a very firm hand on his own legacy, shall we say. And we went for coffee, and we had a lovely chat, and a lovely he doesn't speak much English, so I was helping out us. And then after we finished the interview, an hour or whatever, we took him back to his house, and then we had to split up quite quickly, because I had to run back and teach another lesson. And so it was just like in between lessons, it was just very usually my sort of film stuff and my other life don't tend to intersperse quite so closely, but that was the case here.
Yeah, it was sort of like, did that just happen sort of moment. Yeah,
you won't believe where I've just been, I was saying to my students.
No, he was when I came back to Venice just recently, we took him. My daughter came with me, and we took him his book, and he was we got to interrupt him during composing. Actually, he was composing, and so we went up into his studio. He has this lovely sort of studio with a kind of mezzanine and all these posters and awards and a little Chucky doll and all sorts of stuff from his career post Don't Look Now, because he did a lot of horror, after that point.
A lot of De Palma. He was De Palma's go-to.
Yeah, so it was a nice sort of full circle moment to sort of take it back to him, really. So, and go up into that beautiful house. Yeah, we only saw the doorway.
That's right. Yeah, sort of. I think his wife wasn't feeling too well. She had the flu or something. So he's like, "I'm sorry, I can't invite you up." But But yeah, it's always nice to see where the artist makes his art.
Well, I had all sort of nearly all the conversations were sort of fraught like that, because it was tricky to pin down the editor, Graham Clifford, because he was sort of all over the place. He was one of the first people I spoke to, but he was the very final thing in the book that I managed to pin down with Mark Jenkin. In fact, we were due to do it in person, and then there were fires in Paris that then stopped the trains, and then we ended up having to do it over Zoom in the end. But yeah, Graham had been sort of going around the world because the LA fires had destroyed his house, so he was just sort of just taking that time to go all over the place, and then and also yeah, just sort of getting Tony Richmond, pinning down Tony Richmond, who's still very busy as a retired cinematographer, but still seems to be all over the place. And so Anthony Dodd Mantle, who the cinematographer, he did the conversation with Tony Richmond, and Anthony was in the middle of location scouting for the 28 Days Later films, 28 years later, sorry, and so he sort of took a break from that, from scouting, set up, and we did that. And so all those three conversations happened in quite stressed circumstances, which was a bit of a baptism for me. But then other contributors I decided that with other contributors like Brett Goldstein, Carol Morley, I think Jason Wood from the BFI, Stephen Woolley, the producer. There's a few others as well. I wanted them to just write a love letter, really, because I just wanted to keep my ask nice and small and just be like, you can write this on the back of a napkin if you want, and just, why do you love it? And people were really generous with their time, and Reece Shearsmith ended up writing the foreword, although I sort of tricked him into that because he said, "Oh, I don't have time to write the foreword, but I'll write you one of your love letters." And he wrote this thing, and I read it, and I said, "Oh, Reece, that is a really nice foreword." He said, "Oh." He said, "Oh, you're kind of right. Yeah, it does. Hold on a second. Let me write a little bit extra, sort of welcome to the book." And then he did that again, really generous with his, everyone. That's the thing about this film. It suddenly I was having, meeting Pino Donaggio and having these conversations with the people who, I'm no one. I hadn't made a book before, so they had to take a lot of faith in me. Just so I could sort of show them other things I'd done, but but to know whether I could do a book or not, people put a lot of faith in that. And so, people were just generous in terms of like just opening their doors to their archives as well, the people who had archives, but I think they trusted it because they sort of knew that ultimately it was a genuine ask, because they knew I was investing in this myself. This was being self-published in the end. This was, I'm just putting a load of money on the line to print this thing because I love it, and they love it too, and so everyone's sort of on the same page, really. Even Studio Canal, who own the rights to the film these days, they were just really generous with their access to the archive and sort of giving me sort of anything I wanted, because art books like this, coffee table books, are they are for love, really. They're not big commercial things, so them trying to take loads of back end off it doesn't make sense for anyone. They would rather the archive be celebrated, which is a great testament to them, really.
And the book stands as I don't mean to diminish or reduce it in any way, but it stands as an advert for the film. Ultimately, you read the book, and the next thing you want to do is watch the film. So if you haven't got your physical copy, and let's face it, there's the Venn diagram of people who love this film and who love physical media is probably just a circle. It tends to coincide.
Yeah.
Quite a lot. One of the things that I remember from our meeting was you were quite excited because you spent the morning going to where John, Donald Sutherland's character, dies his violent death, and you'd actually found something that you were really keen to show me.
Yeah. That was that trip, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. Well, when I'd done the previous sort of set of photos in 2007-8, I had you couldn't get into the Palazzo Grimani, which is where the film ends. It was actually being renovated, long renovation, partly funded by the Venice in Peril campaign you mentioned earlier, which features in the film. So again, full circle on that. But now it's a restored museum, and it's incredibly beautiful. And you could walk around all the bits from the film except where he finally climbs the stairs, and you can see the staircase through a little window. There's one part of the museum which spirals up to a very small top room, and you're not allowed to go up there. But after many letters and emails to various people in bad Italian translations, I got permission to they said I could come and see it. And what's nice about that is that the staff of the museum, who are all quite young, they didn't really know the film, and I had the film on my iPad. So they were really amazed to see sort of some of the frescoes and the unrestored frescoes that you get a glimpse of in those moments, especially when he dies and all those cuts and the camera's swirling around the ceilings and the floors, and you're catching a glimpse of all this stuff from 50 years ago, way before they started restoring it. So they're amazed by this, and they said, "Oh, there's as we go up to the room, there's blood on the floor and the wall still." And they said it so casually. I was like, oh, you what? And they said, yeah, there's still blood marks. And I could not believe it. It was like that ultimate film geek moment. We kind of go up the steps, and it's just, wow, it's a very dark room. Only had a lot of torchlight really to see. But yeah, they were right. There's obviously there's a lot of blood in that final sequence. That kind of really red 70s, blood. And
sort of Italian horror movie.
Flecks
blood.
of it on the wall. Yeah. Flecks of it on the wall and a little bit of it on the floor. And they let me sort of take some photographs there. And it is a very small room, only tall enough for sort of a killer dwarf and Donald on his knees, really.
Wow.
It's not open. Yeah, so they can't open to the public. It wouldn't be safe or practical. You can see, but it's the only unrestored space there. So yeah, that was the end of that was sort of one of the real sort of special location moments. I think that and the house from the opening of the film, which in England, which I've spent quite a lot of time at now with the family there, who is still the same family who owned it when it was filmed. So they've been very kind and generous, letting me poke around.
That's a wonderful story. I love I love the discovery of the blood. It's your Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, in the end, in the book, there's very little sort of now and then photographs. I really started to sort of put that idea aside. People have done that online as well since then. There's some really good websites where people have sort of done that, and I thought, well, I need a nod to it in the book because that's the kernel of the project. But I do put a few pages at the back of little comparisons, and including the best shot I could get of some blood flecks on a wall.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think the book's full of discoveries, and I loved finding out that Pino Donaggio was going to be was asked to do Medusa Touch, but he wasn't there when the phone call came, and that was on the basis of Don't Look Now that they wanted him to follow it up. So that was a great piece of information. What sort of was your favourite discovery? Was there something that sort of you didn't expect to find out and you came across and that excited you?
Well, there's a lot of sort of like what we call exclusive things in the book in a sense in terms of photographs, but I'd heard about a Daphne du Maurier letter to Nicolas Roeg that she had written it. And we couldn't find that at Nick's house. And a lot of Nick's stuff had gone to the V&A, a lot of his archive, all of his archive, not just about this film. But that was inaccessible, sorry, because they were renovating. So there's 100 boxes of Nick Roeg archive unsorted at the V&A. And it was a question of whether I waited for that or just, what there would be. And it was mostly going to be just paperwork and things. So in the end, I went without that. But then Chris Bryant, who was one of the screenwriters who's passed away now, his wife Pen Dobson, she had a really nice copy of that letter eventually, and so she scanned that for me. So I have this lovely letter on du Maurier's own sort of headed paper, typed, lovely scan of that in the book, and how much she really enjoyed the film. And how he really captured the couple that she'd seen travelling, which sort of inspired her story. So that's a nice bit in the book. The du Maurier estate were lovely about the. I used some excerpts from the short story because I think what gets lost along the way is, especially about things like the love scene, is that actually it's very close to the short story. Apart from the opening sequence, which is generated for the film, in the short story, the child has died already from meningitis. It's not the big sort of shock horror at the beginning. There are sort of really seminal moments in the short story. The ending, even the love scene is nodded to in the short story. So it is a creation of the film, and everyone talks about it being sort of Nick's creation. But if you read the short story, there's a very clear point where Daphne du Maurier infers, at exactly the same point in the story, that John and Laura are going to make love now because she's had this sort of emotional release of seeing reaching out to the girl through the sisters, and so it's all there. It's actually, yeah, really, really close. And so I used some excerpts sort of, peppered throughout the book, and the Du Maurier estate were again the generosity that has come through the project. They just sort of let me do that. They love it's their favourite adaptation as well, so they really like that. Uh, and so the other main discovery, there was sort of a tipping point. Obviously, the book, as you know, the book is quite big and heavy now. It's almost a coffee table on its own.
You should just include some fold out legs.
Yeah, fold out legs, and then it's not a bad idea. But it was a tipping point. I'd found some archive. There was some photographs. The BFI had some nice ones. Studio Canal had some nice ones, but it wasn't like revelatory. And Julie Christie had sort of had a few things, and Andrea Gaylor, who's Julie's friend, who did the costumes and was in Venice all the time. They had different bits and pieces. I thought there's enough here with the writing, with the writing I got from people, and there'll be enough for a reasonable book. But then I'd been talking to Frank Connor, who was a film photographer, and Frank had unusually he had said he had the negatives for the stuff he'd shot, which is only the bit in England. It's very unusual for a film photographer to keep their negatives because they hand them over, that you don't even own those shots anymore. But he also ran a lab back in the days. He's only 19, but he ran a very popular lab where people would come in to get their stuff made up into prints, and he was very good at that, and that's how he got the job. In fact, Brian Eatwell, the uncredited production designer on the British bit, had sort of said, hey kid, do you want to take a couple of shots for the film? That slide that Donald's looking at, the opening sequence, which is a church with a little red figure in the bottom, actually shot in Kingston upon Thames. That's at a church in England, but Frank shot that slide and did a few days on the English shoot. He said, I was 19, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was an excellent printer, so I could print up the pictures to look great. But as a photographer, I was getting a very thin focus, but he went on to become an incredibly prolific, film still photographer. Yeah, he worked on Cry Freedom, Gandhi, Octopussy, all the way up until Collateral, I think was maybe his last before he retired. So he was on all of these films. So he just happened to have his negatives. And then as it turned out, when he said, you can scan them, he went to get the box, which has been in storage for ages. He realized he had everything. He didn't just have his, he had all of the things, because at a certain point he got to print some of his negatives, and the archive then at Shepperton, I think it was, said, Frank, you should take these because this archive's getting moved, which is sort of industry talk for destroyed, really.
Yeah, right.
You never, and things disappear at that point. They said, take your last Emperor stuff and take Don't Look Now. And he's like, I didn't really do much on Don't Look Now, but all right, I'll look after those. And then when he went back, months later to take them back, having made some prints up, that archive was gone. And obviously, as someone with an incredible studio and stuff, he thought, well, I'll put these in for safekeeping. And then decades passed, and thank God that little sort of, that little moment there of him deciding to take it meant that at a certain point where I thought I had just about enough for a book, about February this year, I realised now I have 3,000 negatives to look through.
Oh my God.
Almost everything. There's a few strips missing. There's a few bits, as these things got chopped up and sent around the world for different press things. But suddenly I had all this stuff that no one ever, most of the people who worked on the film will have never seen this. They weren't. Some of it was made up into contact sheets, but most of the production stuff, the day-to-day production stuff, wouldn't have been. They would have just circled a shot and gone like, yeah, we like that one, print those. And so it was the goldmine moment, really. And so I spent a lot of time, about 6 series of 24 that I was rewatching at the time. I thought I need something on I can just have in the background because it takes so long to scan. I watched 6 seasons, a nice Sutherland link there. And I watched 6 seasons of 24 while scanning one by one, looking at these negatives and sort of uncovering each one you sort of wait 45 seconds for it to sort of give you the preview, and you're like, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? It's sort of lovely.
Yeah.
And at that point, I thought, well, I could do this for the rest of my life. I could scan negatives and uncover, film gems, and you'd sort of get a shot and you'd be like, oh, wow, you're seeing all this stuff. Because, again, you don't, it's quite a recent thing, really, that we want to see the behind the scenes, that we want to see booms and cameras, mixing desks and stuff. Even in behind the scenes stuff from old movie books, it's all behind. It might just be a director looking at a script with an actor. They never wanted to show you the guts, you know. And there isn't loads of those shots because again, the photographers weren't even thinking about taking pictures of the kind of guts of it. Nowadays, you have a film photographer on set, and they're taking pictures of everything, taking pictures of people's coffee cups, whatever, and it's in a Dropbox, and 100 people get a copy of that Dropbox, and those pictures live on in some form forever. But you only get these negatives, and they only print the ones that they decide on, and then everything else is put away. So God knows what else is out there, in these archives here and there. So Frank's an amazing photographer, and I sort of owe him a real debt that he managed. And so Studio Canal were really grateful that they were essentially rescued, in that sense.
And also it becomes a real historical document because you can see from the photographs, okay, that equipment was being used and that was the person who was there on the day, and that was so that some of those, you can what's the word? It's like in a murder investigation almost, where it's not enough to have a witness statement. You have to have some other evidence that it begins with a C. Corroborate. That's the word.
Corroborating evidence. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So someone can say, "Oh, so and so was never there on that day," and it's like, "No, there they are." They're operating the camera or whatever.
And yeah, the other nice thing it sort of did, which I never sort of figured it would, and because again, the stuff just wasn't noted down in that way, but there was in the back of the book for the first time, I get to list as full a credit list as I can list because so many people on the English side of production weren't credited, partly because the Italian-English co-production had to be 50-50 exactly. Not 51, 49, 50-50. So they had to be really careful about that, or that person needs to be Italian, that person needs to be English. It was really
tax credits.
Yeah. Oh, there's a funny story that one of the producers told me, who I actually happened to find 9 miles away from my house in the end, living in Harpenden. After finding everyone, I found Frederick Muller, the only person I've ever met who lived and worked with Orson Welles, living in Harpenden, and he was on the Italian side of production, and he said, at a certain point it wasn't going to get released because they said, it's not 50-50, you've got this French Daphne du Maurier involved in the production, and they had to write back and get the consulate to sort of say, excuse me, Daphne du Maurier is English, she's not French.
Yeah.
So these sort of funny things that people remember over time. But there's a full-on credit list, and also the photos, sort of getting back to my point, which I digress from, is the photos uncovered all these Italian people that worked on the film. They're just faces in the book. I can't find out who they are, name a couple of people I've been able to identify. And even on the British side, there are some people, even Tony Richmond's not able to remember who exactly they were, but they're there, we can sort of see them, and they're so I like to think that at some point someone in Italy will get a hold of this book and be like, there's my uncle, that's my uncle working on that film, because they're there. And when I last came back to Venice earlier this year, because I hadn't found him before. For some reason, it sort of slipped through my net, but I found an amazing man called Giovanni Sokol, who's a sort of well-known Venetian painter. He used to design opera sets and all different theatre stuff. But when he was a young man, he did some film stuff, and he ended up being the art director on Don't Look Now. And so he sat with Nick and sketched out lots of scenes. It wasn't art directing in the sort of way we sort of know it today, where they're sort of designing sets. It was very much, what have we got? What does Ristorante Roma look like? Let's sketch that. And so he sort of sat with Nick and sort of sketched it all out, and different diagrams and things. And he had all of that. He had it all still. It looked like he'd sketched it yesterday. It was so pristine. And so I got to visit his beautiful, beautiful studio in Venice, and he just let me have it all. and just scan it and take pictures. And he had even like these little wooden boxes he made, which you can see in the background of the kids' hospital when Julie Christie faints. These kids, like these boxes, so the kids could jump up and down on them. He still had them in his study
Wow.
in Italy. And yeah, wonderful guide. So he had some stories, about it. He said when Nick first came to him, Nick said to him, "I wanted to look like David Hockney." He
Hmm.
said, "What? David Hockney." That was his instruction from Nick.
Well, there's
Uh,
your water connection.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, he just opened up that archive, but he had lots of paperwork still, and that paperwork had all the call sheets and all the names of the people and where they stayed and what their phone numbers were for connecting in Venice and when who was being picked up when and all that stuff. So I was able from that to piece together this really comprehensive credit list of people who were just working as electricians who never get thanked and don't make it to the credits of these old movies because they just, they put the top they put, 10 screens of credits. Everyone's just top line people,
Yeah.
but all those other people that we now credit on films, whether they've just, served food or done, one thing, they always get on the credits now, so to speak. But yeah, back then they didn't. And so I'm hoping the book acts as that sort of archive as well. So it's sort of visual, but there's a lot of information in there to hopefully be part of, the
I mean,
future.
I think the thing that helps the book, which makes it such a beautiful thing to look at, a thing of beauty, is also because Venice is such a beautiful place. So you're in the midst of it's almost every behind the scenes shot is going to be
Yeah.
on its own a beautiful thing. Talking about credits from the low from the uncredited to the top line talent, have you had any feedback from Julie Christie in terms of the?
Well, I know Julie's got the book now, and I know she likes it. She we sort of paused interaction. I paused interaction with Julie because Julie lost her husband a couple of months ago,
Mm,
and so it's just been a difficult time of adjustment. And so I didn't want to sort of darken her door with this really, but I am due to hear from her and have a hopeful cup of tea with Julie because I'd like to just. I'd like to sort of sit with her and look at it. She contributed some photos and some memories, from from things she had. She hasn't got she doesn't keep loads of stuff, and she hasn't got a lot of memories from the time really. But again, we're sort of anyone who worked on the film, we're sort of talking about people in their mid to late 80s now. So
right. Yeah.
there's sort of a limit. But I that's sort of the last piece of the puzzle, really. Well, there's two pieces of the puzzle. I'd like to make sure Kiefer Sutherland gets one, and
Right.
I'd like to because I was talking to Donald Sutherland at the very beginning, but he wasn't well enough to sort of to do much. But Donald had spoken a lot on record about the film. I was quite, there's a lot of archival stuff about Donald. And I had some lovely stuff from Julie, archival stuff from Julie, which Mark Salisbury, the writer who does a lot of film books, you probably know Mark.
Mm,
He'd done a video interview with her for a documentary that never happened, and he let me have that. And that was at a point where Julie was really just open about talking about things, talking about how wonderful the love scene was, in terms of just how much they trusted Nick and how they just would have done anything for him really, and that sort of. And so I was very fortunate to get sort of that interview from it's probably done in the 90s, I think.
I was going to say you've been a filmmaker. Have you? Is there a decent documentary out there? Would you fancy doing it?
Because those who knew me as a filmmaker were asking that was there. I don't know if there is. I think I'm probably too close to do it.
Right.
If that would have felt like work in a different way. This is kind of fun, and and also it would have been being an essentially a nobody. It's a different ask to be like, oh, I'd like to come and talk to Julie Christie and film it.
Mm, mm.
Suddenly everyone it's a different meaning for people, and also just a different cost in doing it. Even though I've got all the gear and stuff, but just you have a physical different cost in terms of coming to shoot stuff. If I was going to bring some gear to Venice, and there's I think that in a sense with 50-year-old stories, there's sort of a finite. amount of stories, like Tony Richmond and Graham Clifford. Oh, actually, Graham was a bit different because he chatted with Mark Jenkin, and they really got into the weeds about some stuff about editing in general, which
Mm.
was nice. But the same stories sort of circle around a lot. So I don't know. I didn't want it. I personally didn't want it to be that. If someone wanted to do one, I would totally like come in on it, and say, look, this is what I found. Let's open up. You can open up all these doors again and do that. But for some reason, I felt it just lived in a book better
Yeah,
because
yeah,
also without actual video, without actual old film footage as well of behind the scenes, it would all
yeah.
just be a documentary with lots of you know Ken Burns zooms on stills and things. Yeah, I felt I also taking it back to be book form to the back to the sort of Du Maurier story in a sense. Like it
Mm.
started in a book form, and it's now back to book form. It seemed the most interesting way to do it.
Yeah, plus it's called writers on film, not documentarians on film. So,
Yeah.
it's not in my interest to encourage people not to write books. I want books, man.
No, but
Um,
it is something I thought about it a lot, and I just when you're sort of doing and when you're doing these things on your own, there's a lot of I'm sure lots of people listening are people who do projects like this on their own, and just it's a slog, and you have to keep that energy going. I've always done things like this on my own, but I also am very tired of doing things like this on my own. And you kind of want that collaboration. And I'd love to do another book, but I wouldn't do it in this way again. I don't think. I would want to have someone do certain elements of it. I love putting it all together, and it was Paul Duncan who does a lot of Big Tashian books.
yeah, we
Paul's the one who encouraged me. Yeah,
friend of the podcast, Paul.
yeah, he was Paul was one of the first people I sat with when I had this idea because I had a very tenuous link to him back from my film festival days, and we sort of went out for lunch, and he sort of said, a bit like what we were talking about off camera before this, you won't, even if you get it published, you won't necessarily get a lot of help with it in terms
Mm.
of putting it out there. He said you'll end up doing a lot of the work, and it won't necessarily be big advances in doing it financially. So he said, if you're not afraid of the putting it together, he said, if you're going to physically put it together and design it, and if you're going to do this and that, he said, I would wholly encourage you to self-publish it if you're not afraid of those sort of elements. And I'm not on social media in any great sense. So that was the sort of bit I had to work hardest on, the sort of the back end, and
Mm.
so having a sort of producer in that sense, or someone who can pick you up when the energy's low, is what I think is what I've always needed when I've done, even with films. When Neil Fox and I would make films, we were great at the making, but when it came to sort of getting it out there, we always needed that person to swoop in with the energy and be like, "Come on, boys, let's
Yeah, the
let's
social
push it up the hill again." And so
right.
that's the bit, which is why things like this today are so good, because it reinvigorates you. Otherwise, you could just sort of sit in your studio and be like, "Oh, how do I sell 3 more copies?" So it's sort of
No, I know what you mean. It's there's a big thing that I think people don't really understand with books and the financial model and everything that happens with conventional publishers. Even that idea of the advance is a really weird idea. We're going to pay you to do something, but actually we're not paying you. We're loaning you the profits. And if when we start making profits, you've already had those. That's your advance. And so when you'll only get paid when you've sold above a certain number. I mean, that's kind of quite that's a weird model to be paid for something. We're not paying you for your work, we're paying for you in terms of the profitability of your work. If
yeah.
I work in a shoe shop, it doesn't matter how many shoes I get sold, except on the basis of, if I don't sell any at all, the shoe shop will eventually close. I'm not getting pay as an advance on the shoes I sell. It's just weird. It's just
Yeah, I mean, I came into this not knowing I didn't really know anything about publishing, really. I know how to print something, not anything
mm,
this big, but I had that experience through printing, festival programs and all that sort of stuff, so I had that sort of knowledge I'd gleaned,
would you
but
would you chase that? Would you do the same model for the next one?
I,
If
I,
you,
I might. I think I sort of say I wouldn't because I'd rather, kind of have help in a different way. But then I always say that, and then eventually I get so I want to chase something so much that I will do it. I it was the same when I built a jazz club. I sort of had opportunity to have this space that I was part of, and I thought, oh, that jazz club I've always thought about doing. Same way with the book; it had been an idea for a while, but I couldn't quite see it. And then I was in the space and thought, yeah, this is the space for it. And I tried to get other, I sort of met with people who were sort of, I thought, oh no, you're going to slow it down because you're just questioning it too much, or you're bringing up the reasons not to do it. And I don't need that; I just need to do it. And so I have that sort of tendency to sort of see the flash of light and go, okay, that's the way. And I think, oh, okay, next time I'll get people to help. Yeah.
I mean,
And don't get me wrong, I've done loads. I've done lots of projects with huge amounts of collaboration. But this one, I suppose this one and my jazz club were two sort of first big projects I did on my own, where I was hammering the wood to the walls, or just scanning the negatives. And then at a certain point, like all these things, people come in and help. My wonderful friend Chris came in and tidied up all of my design ideas. He says, I see what you're trying to do there. Let's do this. But I don't know. I love that sort of. I've always just worked. It's a blessing and a curse, because also you then don't get invited to collaborate on things because people think you're busy and have got it together. Whereas actually you'd like to be invited to the party halfway along. But I tend to be the person who sort of writes the thing and then is sweeping up at the end. And actually, I'd love someone to come along and say, oh, we were thinking about making this film. We're looking for XYZ. But it doesn't happen, because I think it's the danger of people think, oh, he's too busy or he's got it together. Whereas actually, this book is a sort of a way for me to say, I'm not kind of looking for work, guys. Look, I could do one of these, and hopefully rewrite my career a bit.
Yeah, and you've involved people. So, I mean, it is a collaborative, it is, in its DNA, it has this collaborative nature, as well as you're the instigator of it. You're the person you're the author of it, but it is something that's also been very inclusive.
Yeah, and that's sort of, it was reinvention really of my career a bit, as you have to do every now and then as an artist. You kind of be like, oh, okay, I don't know if I'm making films anymore. I don't know if that model I grew up with of wanting to make independent films has changed massively. You can't do that Robert Rodriguez thing anymore, where you make a low budget film and try and get the next bigger one and then the next bigger one. It just doesn't quite work in that way. And so I don't know. I approached this because, like I said, I didn't know anything about publishing really, apart from the fact that, but I didn't know anything about jazz clubs, like building a jazz club. But I just approached this like making a film, really. To me, it was the same. The end product was printed and not filmed. And so the financial model was kind of like, I thought, well, I'll just spend hobby money. That's sort of what I do, really. I sort of have a little pot of creative money, which I've built up over the years through projects. And I think, well, I'll put it into the book, and hopefully that pot fills up again because I sell enough, and then that'll do the next thing, because it's quite a big tome to print. It's quite a people either get that or they don't. They either be like, why would you spend that money? Why would you do that? I'm like, well, some people would spend this printing money on a nicer car or a cruise. I would rather spend it on a thing that then maybe leads to another thing. It's just the way I'm wired, I think. And those who get it are generally the people who are going to buy it anyway, because they understand that's what makes the creative world go round. If we don't celebrate what's gone before or protect it, and in those sorts of ways, it will have vanished.
Absolutely, I think we're fighting the entropy that Roeg is cataloguing in the film. We're trying to hold things together for as long as we can, and I'm just absolutely full of admiration for it. It's such a wonderfully produced book. It's so beautiful, and it stands comparison with the best of Tash and the best of all of those great. I mean, we've got to say there's a wonderful market, as you've pointed out already, in this kind kind of, Jay Glennie does a few, has done a load, and he's doing some more Tarantino books I've seen recently, and Abrams does some great. Ian Nathan does some great books with them, so there is that corner of the market that is really specifically there, and this book is absolutely head and shoulders with and above those, I think.
Thank you. That's appreciated.
Yeah,
You see
and
a lot of books. I see from your feeds that you have a lot of books in your life, so it's nice.
yeah, and I'm very lucky because I get a lot of them I get sent, but often there'll be a case where I don't know. Last year, Christopher Frayling had a new Sergio Leone book, and I wasn't getting no one was sending me a copy, and I was like, bugger this, I'll just order it for myself. I've not got to that stage of I don't know, complacence, where it's just like, I'm not, if you're not going to send me a freebie, I'm not buying it. It's like, no, I'll put my hand in my pocket as well, I don't care. As you say, hobby money, what else is it there for? Final question then, Justin. What is a recommended film book that you'd like to suggest for our listeners?
Oh, wow. Oh, you didn't prep me for this.
What are you talking about? 350 episodes. We always ask the question at the end.
True, it's true.
Although sometimes you're right. Sometimes I don't ask the question. So
I think it's again. This is maybe this speaks to me not being the writer in the traditional sense, but the one I always pick up the most is it's not a written film. It's Wim Wenders' book Once. You've seen his. It's a photography book of just lots of pictures he took, and it always just have a very simple but eloquent, sentence or two that go with the pictures he took whilst making Paris, Texas, or just being at a baseball game with Arthur Miller, and just lovely bits of life. And they speak to me like films because they feel everything. They're everything I love about Wim Wenders.
Yeah.
But they're just, so it's just called Once, and it's probably 20, 30 years old now. It's a book. It's still, you can still get that.
What a wonderful choice. That so reminds me. I mean, I think Wim Wenders is like a filmmaker no matter what he's doing, So if he's taking a photograph, he's a filmmaker. If he's writing, he's a filmmaker. If he's talking, it's a little bit like David Lynch, No matter what, if he's doing an album, he's a filmmaker. It's all in his DNA. It's all in his art,
Yeah, but I think it's just there's so much from it, Every still has got it's got more story than he tells, and imagining what is before and after that. I think I always have it. I've always had it in my office, just there. It's one of those books you can just take one picture from, and one a day, and a bit like your good morning posts you do. I love those. There's sort of there's so much behind some of those pictures. Some days I love them.
Oh, brilliant! That's nice to know. They have evolved over the years. I always used to, when it was Twitter, it was start your day with, and then there would be a picture of something behind the scenes or whatever. But it's now become good.
Now I'm thinking of loads of other books, but I'm going to stick.
You can give us another book if you like.
Well, there's another one I just want to keep because it's one of my first obsessions. I used to love Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, and Johnny Weissmuller's son wrote a really nice book called My Father Tarzan, I think it's called. And it's just a very, very simple book, but it's a really amazing insight into an actor who wasn't an actor. Obviously, he was an incredible swimmer, probably still the greatest swimmer who ever lived. And then who became this megastar, a star on a sort of, Tom Cruise level, but in the 1930s. And it was also kind of almost in charge of the gang. He would hang out with, Humphrey Bogart and the likes of that, and John Wayne and stuff. But Weissmuller was kind of like, they all loved him like he was like the boss of the gang almost, because he had that way. But he was just a big kid, really. Like a lot of these celebrities, like in a way Elvis was kind of just this big-hearted kid, really, who was just overtaken by fame. And Johnny Weissmuller had no blueprint to work from at that point. He was
Mm.
one of those first who sort of got destroyed by it, and just lovely little stories about him. Just taking the lion home because the MGM lion was kind of it was sort of- the trainer was a drunk. Would go off and Johnny Weissmuller would occasionally take the lion back with him because the lion would be left there unfed and. But he was buried by his he married lots of times and he was buried in an unmarked grave in Acapulco by his last wife who was a real wretch and
Mm.
so this amazing movie star was just sort of in this like she told the family he was buried overlooking this wonderful vista and stuff but she buried him in this like pigsty basically and so just and it's really nice because it's like a son writing about his dad, knowing that there are lots of problems with his dad,
Mm.
but ultimately he was a bit of a one of a kind sort of movie star. But back in the day, which we don't really sort of see since sort of in that particular way. But yeah,
I
that's the
went
other one.
I went back and watched the early Tarzans with Weissmuller, and they're really good. I mean, they really stand
Yeah.
up. I mean, of course, they've got some outdated notions and race and stuff like that, but also, the pre-code ones, especially. In some ways, actually, they kind of surprise you. We always have this sort of slightly condescending notion of old films and the gender roles aren't going to be up to much or anything. And then you go back to the pre-code films and you find actually the women are very dominant and have real, Design for Living, the one of the old films with Gary Cooper and Miriam Hopkins, is just absolutely stunning, like menage a trois film, which in the end has them all basically deciding to be a throuple. And it's just like I mean, it's like unspoken, but they're in a taxi at the end and they're going, "So what are we gonna do? We'll work something out." It's like,
I haven't seen that.
oh,
I'm
you've
gonna
got,
look,
yeah,
I will
you've
look that
got
up.
to. It's
Yeah.
it's it's amazing. I mean, it's a brilliant comedy. The ending aside, it's a superb comedy. It's absolutely one of those
Yeah, those
sparkling.
Tarzans are really racy, and they're really
Yeah,
violent. I mean, but some of the trick photography with the fight in the alligators, the crocodiles underwater, and some of that stuff and the real work with live animals, it's terrifying, really.
mm.
Yeah, I love them. Many a time when I was growing up, the Tarzan call was heard around the neighborhoods of Luton.
Did you
Spent
ever
a good
see? Did you ever see Raw? Did you ever see?
yes,
Oh, that's a film. Wow, that's a film with Tippi Hedren and Melanie
yeah.
Griffiths, and I forget what the father was called, but
Yeah, but it's Bruce something. I can't remember. Yeah, with the wild. Yeah, yeah. If you
they're
haven't
just
seen it before, yeah, out there, it's incredible. And the trailers all like mostly like the lions and the leopards and stuff like that. But actually, the most violent scene, the scary scene, is that elephant
mm.
when that very cross elephant just destroys that boat. It's just it's unbelievable.
I mean, the
It's
thing that's really funny is that it's filmed like the script is like a Disney live action film with like happy families and comedy moments and stuff. Oh no, the lions are in the house again. But the actual reality of what you're looking on screen is like a horror. It's like Cujo, but
Well, yeah,
multiplied by
when they
100.
redid that trailer, they sort of listed everyone's, terrible injuries, facial reconstructive surgery. I think
Yeah.
Jan de Bont, who later went on to make Speed, he had perforations from bites and all sorts of stuff. Unbelievable. But yeah, that's next level Tarzan stuff. Nick Roeg, I think, shot on Tarzan's Greatest Adventure, one of the later Gordon Scott films. There you go,
He did.
bring it back to Nick Roeg again.
He did.
Which that's a cracking movie.
Which co-starred Sean Connery.
Yeah. And
As,
yeah. And so, is Magooan in that as well? Patrick
no,
Magooan?
Magoon isn't
Uh,
in it. It's Anthony Quayle
yeah.
is the main villain, and the other villain is a guy called it's not McClintock, but it has that sort of name, and he
See the
is
guy dies in the swamp with his hand. Someone goes in the quicksand. I always
yeah,
remember their
that's
hand.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, well, it's sticking up. That was brilliant.
the in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he is one of the sort of gunfighters. He's a Canadian actor. and is one of the gunfighters who was trying to capture Eli Wallach's character.
Yeah, he has that kind of scrawny, kind of gold prospector look, doesn't he?
Exactly. Al Mullock is his name. He's the one-armed fighter. And there was a story about him. He's a Canadian actor, and he was alcoholic, and a pretty sad life. And he jumped out of the hotel window one day during filming to kill himself, essentially. Just I can't. And he jumped out, and the ambulance came to get him, but he was in costume. He was still dressed in character. And so Sergio Leone was literally running down the street after the ambulance saying, "Get the coat off him, get the coat off him." Because we've still got a couple of shots to make. So, sort of like the heartlessness of film directors in the middle of a shoot. It's all like, I don't care if he dies, just get the coat off him. But that was, I can't remember if that was Good, the Bad and the Ugly or Once Upon a Time in the West, because I'm not sure if does he turn up in Once Upon a Time in the West?
Oh, I can't remember now.
Is he one of the three gunfighters? There's Woody Strode, there's the guy with the
yeah, I think
he might be,
maybe he is, because I'm sure I'm thinking of the same guy. When I picture him in that really ultra close up, shot on 135mm lens, kind of full screen.
Yeah, definitely. His final film here. Yeah, he was one of the three gunfighters waiting for Charles Bronson at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in the West. So that must have been the film he finished on. But yeah, wow, what a strange career.
Sounds like we have a whole other Tarzan podcast to get through.
Yeah, Tarzan.
Another day.
Yeah, absolutely. We should do that. But listen, Justin, it's been an absolute joy talking to you, and it's been a real pleasure working on this book, although I did very little working on this book.
Well, no, I thank you for your contribution. No, you were there early on, and you helped get it started, so I appreciate it very much.